The next step of this process is agenda setting. It's one thing to define the problem. It's another to actually get it on the agenda, the point at which legislators or public officials actually begin to have active conversations about the problem and start to figure out potential solutions to address it. We break the agenda down into two different types. The first is the systemic agenda. This deals with issues which have the public attention. Remember, these are ones we consider obvious issues and have salience to them, where the American public actually pays attention to them and considers them. The second is what's known as the institutional agenda. This is sometimes called the formal agenda, basically what those in power are prepared to deal with. Think of these as the things that policymakers want to get done. Yet, if we go back to step 1A, problem definition, not all problems are created equal, and not all problems will eventually rise to a point of salience either in the public attention or on that formal agenda and actually get addressed by policymakers. Most are just ignored. If you want to think about how these two things work, consider current events. What issues are currently on the agenda? Think about what you've heard in the news, what you've seen on social media, what you've heard political candidates talk about. Very often those things address the economy, healthcare, national security, kind of big issues that we're concerned with. Another way to think about it is what public problems or issues are not on the agenda right now. But if conditions were right, what could bubble up to a point of salience and actually make the agenda? Could this be issues of equality, women's rights, racial issues, healthcare? All it takes is a spark, and people could galvanize around the issue, and it could rise to a point of salience and make its way onto the agenda where policymakers cannot ignore it. The next step in this process is policy formulation. Basically, the policymakers have to figure out ways to deal with the problem at hand. If you think back to Module 1, remember, policymakers have a large menu of options at their disposal to figure out how to address problems. At this stage of the process, the formal and informal actors all promote various policy proposals or policy alternatives to address the problem. Debate ensues, and a multitude of policy options are proposed. Policy analysis is very useful at this stage to ultimately consider the various options that policymakers have at their disposal to address the problem. There are a lot of policy options at the policymaker's disposal. Some of these tools include regulations like setting rules, guidelines, benchmarks, government management like creating new programs, taxing and spending, things like giving tax breaks to individuals, corporations, companies, market mechanisms, things like creating monetary policy and dealing with money supply, as well as education information, public education, reframing, issues like that. Given that there are so many different types of policy tools out there, the American political scientist Theodore Lowy proposed a typology to help us understand these different types. The first of this classification are distributive policies. They extend goods and services to members of an organization, as well as distributing the costs of the goods and services amongst the members of the organization. Examples include government policies that impact spending for things like welfare, public education, highways, and public safety, or a professional organization's benefit plan. Regulatory policies or mandates limit discretion of individuals and agencies, or otherwise compel certain types of behavior. These policies are generally thought to be best applied when good behavior can be easily defined and bad behavior can be easily regulated and punished through fines or sanctions. An example of a fairly successful public regulatory policy is that of highway speed. Finally, redistributive policies are ones where we consider them a zero-sum game. There are winners and losers from the policy. One person gains while another pays for it. Taken together, you can think through the big long list of policy tools from Module 1 and think about how each tool fits into all these various policy typology categorizations.